Senator, the CFPB passed under Dodd-Frank. Isn't it unique or fairly unique in that it receives its funding without appropriation from Congress?
Yes, that's my understanding, is that because this position is embedded within the Federal Reserve, and because the Federal Reserve Bank is not, in a sense, in a literal sense, in the traditional sense, a government agency, but rather a private for-profit corporation, it's not an entity that Congress controls in the sense of controlling its purse strings. And so that is a significant concern that many have harbored.
Right. So you had no other way to ask for reform, consideration, or anything else other than this confirmation. It was an unusual situation in which one of the ordinary powers of the House and the Senate is to not fund something that a previous Congress has chosen to do. But in the case of the CFPB, that's not the case. Is that correct?
That is correct, and in that respect it enjoys an unusual degree of insulation from the normal controls on any government. And that degree of insulation historically has been reserved for despots.
Good word. One of the points that I've been given by Cater on asking unanimous consent to be placed in the record is on their website, they note that 97% of President Obama's nominations in 2011 were confirmed by your body. Is that roughly your understanding?
Yes.
So the fact is, you're practically a rubber stamp to what the President wants, right?
Some of us try not to see ourselves quite that way, but we have been very cooperative in confirming this President's nominees. I, in fact, myself, despite the fact that I've harbored significant policy, ideological, and political differences with many, if not most, of the President's nominees, I have continued to vote for them, and most of them have been confirmed, many with my vote.
So you've exercised advice and consent, and in the affirmative 97% of the time. Let me go to another portion, because you're both personally and as a family historically better informed than we are. Hasn't the Senate exercised this refusal in the past, even at times to the Supreme Court? And hasn't it been the view that if the Senate decided not to have a Supreme Court, all they would have to do is wait for them to die off, that ultimately it is within the power over a period of time for the Senate to choose not to fill vacancies, that is within its historic power, and they have asserted it in the past?
The Supreme Court certainly is on a different plane from other government officials. The Supreme Court, unlike many other government officials, certainly unlike the people who serve in the NLRB or the CFPB or elsewhere, are not people whose positions are specifically created under and identified in the Constitution. So that's different. But the overarching question you're asking is whether or not the Senate, in its advice and consent function, is required to give its consent, to in fact approve, and it isn't. And that is the Senate's prerogative.
Right. So both at District Court, Circuit Court of Appeals, and actually at the Supreme Court, they have chosen simply not to act on presidential appointments in the past, and by doing so, let them hang until the President withdrew them, or the nominee went somewhere else, or the President's term expired, or he found somebody else to appoint. Isn't that correct?
In many, many instances, more instances than I can count.
Now, ambassadors are one of the confirmations that you do in the Senate. And if we do not have an ambassador, we in fact have a lower standing in that foreign country and a lower ability to have a presence around the world. Isn't that true?
That argument has been made, and I suspect there's some truth to it.
And isn't it routine? And they certainly envision the Constitution. They're not just some affectation of the the administration's last Congress. So isn't it true that it has been the practice of the Senate under Senator Reid sometimes simply to say that nominee is dead on arrival and go find somebody else and not call for a vote?
Yes.
Isn't it true that often nominees are pre-vetted before they're put up so as not to embarrass them? And in fact, there's a whole discussion because they so want to not have that controversy?
That is also correct. Well-known fact that this occurs, and with good reason.
With good reason. So I guess a couple last questions. Motion to adjourn in the Senate. I'm a different body here, but it's in order here at any time. Was there a motion to adjourn by the Democrats issued? Did they try to adjourn?
My understanding is that we could not adjourn because, consistent with Article 1, Section 5 of the Constitution, we were required to obtain the consent of the House of Representatives to adjourn, and before adjourning, for any period of time longer than 72 hours. Given that we didn't receive such consent, the Senate was unable to adjourn for any period of time longer than 72 hours, and so we continued holding pro forma sessions, basically every 72 hours throughout that period.
But let's talk about pro forma sessions. The last question very quickly. Every third day, who got in the chair over in the Senate? Was it a Republican?
Normally a Democrat, is my understanding.
Normally or always?
Always.
So Senator Reid had to put a Democrat in the chair to hold the pro forma session every third day, and he did so.
Correct.
Thank you.